The Nintendo 64, first released in 1996, is a fondly remembered and beloved console. Despite losing out to a certain newcomer in terms of sales, Nintendo's chunky 64-bit beast is home to some of the most important games in history, with the likes of Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time defining early 3D gaming, GoldenEye 007 proving that consoles could be home to must-have FPS titles, and games like Banjo-Kazooie, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, and Paper Mario delighting critics and gamers alike. Not everything can be great though, and hidden beneath all the F-Zero X's and the 1080-degree snowboardings is a subset of games barely worth the cardboard boxes they came in. That's right, we've got our negative hats on today, and we're looking at the absolute worst that Nintendo's venerable console has to offer. The usual rules apply. Titles are ranked by their average review score, and we filtered out anything with fewer than 7 reviews to ensure we present you with only the most certifiable dross. So join us then, as we take a dive into the very bottom of the N64 barrel. I wonder what we'll find under all the bananas. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games for the N64. Number 10. Nagano Winter Olympics 98, 1998, 47.77%. Yes, we might have our negative hats on, but I hope you brought your bobble hats along, because we're starting off chilly with Nagano Winter Olympics 98. Based on the real-life 1998 Winter Olympics event, Nagano Winter Olympics 98 came out on the PS1 as well, but that one sits a whole point higher in the cumulative rankings stakes. Must be that slightly crunchier-looking snow or something. In the game, players are given the opportunity to fling themselves off of various precarious precipices and down a number of dangerously slippy constructions in the name of competition. Although there's also curling on offer too, if you fancy something a bit safer. It was developed by Konami and offered Olympic mode, where players try for medals in single events, or Championship mode, where performances are kept track of over multiple events. 16 nations are available to play as, although strangely, some of them are exclusive to certain platforms. Want to play as Finland or the Netherlands? Well, I hope you specifically bought the N64 version then. But actually, no, we don't hope that at all, because it isn't very good, and was especially let down by insultingly easy gameplay that required very little input from the player. Ultimately, Nagano Winter Olympics 98 fell into a mangled heap at the bottom of the mountain, and really puts the no in Nagano. Number 9. Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage, 2001, 47.36%. Exclusive to the N64, our next title was developed by H2O Entertainment and offers a turn-based RPG experience on a console lacking in quality examples of that genre. Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage tells the story of Alaron, a young squire who finds himself afflicted with an incurable poison and ends up on an epic quest to find his true identity. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel very epic. Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage is certainly ambitious, with a large world to explore, a grand story to uncover, and a detailed battle system where players can make use of positioning to gain advantages. It also has a day-night cycle, which was something of a rarity at the time, with the time of day affecting battles depending on the character's affinity to the sun or the moon. But it's all presented at such a ponderous pace with so little flair that very few players will get far enough to learn of Alaron's true origins. Reviewers of the era all tended to admire the game's ambition and scope, but couldn't bring themselves to recommend Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage due to the trudging tedium of the moment-to-moment gameplay. Feels like this one came out a generation or two too early. Number 8. GT64 Championship Edition, 1998, 46.52%. The Super GT, or All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship, is a real-life series of sanctioned races that takes place on well-known Japanese racetracks. Our next title, GT64 Championship Edition, is an N64 exclusive game officially licensed by the All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship and features cars and drivers from the previous year's event. While it certainly had the visual and audio charm of those early polygonal races, GT64 Championship Edition suffers from a bit of an identity crisis, hovering in that unsatisfying middle ground between simulation and arcade racing. Developed by Imagineer, who are most well known nowadays for games like Fitness Boxing and Little Friends Dogs and Cats, GT64 Championship Edition features a progression system not dissimilar to Gran Turismo and handling that apes Daytona USA, but sadly falls down compared to both games in terms of quality. Frustrating controls coupled with endless right-angle turns led to an infuriating experience, and reviewers were also let down by the number of courses on offer, as despite claiming to have 12 tracks, most of those were just shorter or mirrored takes on the 3 actual tracks. All of these issues and more left GT64 Championship Edition in the rearview mirrors of its peers, embarrassingly stalled on the starting grid. Number 7. WCW Nitro, 1999, 46.08%. WCW's status in 1999 was that of a wrestling promotion on the brink of disaster that couldn't stop shooting itself in the foot. Amidst all this promotion-killing chaos, however, they were still pumping out video games. But 1999's WCW Nitro failed to live up to previous WCW games that had graced Nintendo's 64-bit machine. The first super kick in the teeth was the fact that this was a port of a year-old PS1 game, and not an experience built from the ground up for the N64 like WCW vs NWO World Tour and WCW/NWO Revenge that preceded it. It was also made by a different developer, with Inland Productions, whose only previous title was a fishing game for the PC, taking over from the legendary Asmic Ace Entertainment and AKI Corporation duo. The N64 version of WCW Nitro was a rushed and careless port of the PS1 game that wasn't even that great to begin with, and already felt dated by the time it was released. Ultimately, THQ tried to cash in on the good name of the previous N64 WCW games by hastily porting a subpar PS1 title and hoping people would buy it based on reputation alone. And that, my friends, will definitely not put butts in seats. Number 6. War Gods, 1997, 45.32%. War Gods is an arcade fighter that was released in 1996 and borrows liberally from the Mortal Kombat series. It's almost as if some cheeky developer saw a market opportunity for a 3D MK game and snuck this one out a year before the release of Mortal Kombat 4. That theory falls down, however, when you learn that War Gods was published and developed by Midway. You know, the Mortal Kombat guys. So why does this game exist? I mean, far be it from us to discourage a new IP, but War Gods feels like such a Mortal Kombat ripoff that it's hard to not be a little confused by the fact that it was actually made by the same people. The game was ported to the N64 in 1997 and differentiated itself from the exploits of Sub-Zero and friends by adding a 3D button mechanic that enabled fighters to break off from the 2D fighting plane and interact with the arenas. War Gods also provided its own take on Mortal Kombat's fatalities and used a graphical technique in which photographs were overlaid onto 3D models. Unfortunately, all of this was hampered by a choppy frame rate and poor animations, making the fighting anything but satisfying, and the character designs were near universally scoffed at for their lame genericness. Maybe they should have given Raiden a cameo role. I'm sure that would have added, wait for it, A certain spark. Number 5. California Speed, 1999, 43.5%. Another Midway-developed arcade port, California Speed allows players to pick from a selection of vehicles with vague real-life equivalents — that's not a Fairchild, that's a Caterham — and then take to the Golden State asphalt in high-speed showdowns on wide-open roads with some delightfully cheesy rock music playing in the background. This all sounds like a good time and a cheap arcade thrill, but unfortunately, California Speed suffers from a severe case of blandness, which is quite an achievement considering the developers threw in what appear to be gigantic UFOs to drive through and other such fantastical nonsense. The graphics were dated even at the time of release, the driving was nothing special, and the game was so easy and low stakes that you would probably even make the podium even if you were asleep at the wheel. The most interesting thing about California Speed is its hidden creepy side. You see, a couple of billboards on the Mojave Desert track, specifically in the N64 port, have some very unsettling text on them. Something about God taking mommies and puppies away, and then a vague threat at the end. Best not play this one, just to be safe, you know? Number 4. South Park Rally, 2000, 43.21%. We're staying on the road for our number 4 entry and revving up recent Worst Games Ever entrant South Park Rally.
The official US PlayStation magazine said, some pretty top right here. That's what they said.
Developed by Tantalus Interactive and published by Acclaim, this irreverent racer was also released on PC, Dreamcast, and PS1 where we played it, and while it didn't review particularly well on any of these other formats, the N64 version sits at the back of the grid. South Park Rally offers up most of what you'd expect from a karting game: a championship mode where drivers and courses are unlocked, a quick-play arcade mode, and multiplayer racing, with the roster of available characters sitting in the 20s, with Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and Isaac Hayes on board for voice duties. However, South Park Rally offers nothing that the likes of Mario Kart 64 hadn't already done, with far more quality and swagger. From the items to the handling, this feels like a South Park skin applied over a very low-quality budget kart racer. And while some reviewers implied that series superfans or lovers of multiplayer mayhem might glean some enjoyment from the game, most agreed that this attempt at Mario Kart's crown could be filed alongside South Park Chef's Love Shack and notoriously abysmal 1998 FPS South Park in the shoddy licensed games that should never be played bin. And if we've got anything to do with it, that's exactly where it will stay. Number 3. G.A.S.P 2 Fighters Next Stream, 1998, 41.17%. Developed and published by Konami, Gasp Fighters Next Stream is a 3D fighting game in the vein of early Virtua Fighter or Tekken titles, and if you don't mind, I'm going to refer to it by its American title, Deadly Arts, for the remainder of this entry. Why it wasn't released in Europe under that far more palatable moniker is one of those mysteries we shall never have the energy nor motivation to look into. Despite the wacky name of the Japanese and European releases, Deadly Arts offers a shockingly generic cast of characters to play as and completely lacks any of the flow and flair of the aforementioned Virtua Fighter and Tekken games. Fighters have no personality, arenas are distinctly forgettable, and the whole thing feels so old hat that you'll barely notice you're even playing it. Reviewers piled on Deadly Arts with scathing remarks, complaining about its terrible frame rate, subpar visuals, and shoddy controls. N64 owners looking for a new 3D fighter alternative to Mortal Kombat 4, which also dropped the ball in the eyes of many, were left with an overall experience that caused them to gasp with dismay, put away the controller, and forget the whole thing happened. In fact, if they were particularly desperate, they may have even booted up their copy of War Gods, which, according to the scores, was a better game. Sorry, Konami. Better luck next time. Number 2. Saban's Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue 2000, 34.11%. Hold on to your brightly coloured lycra and cheap-looking plastic accessories, Rangers, because we're taking a big plunge in the quality stakes now, heading out of the 40s and straight into the low 30s, with a couple of titles that are legendarily bad. First up is Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, and honestly, I don't really have to say anything about this. Just look at these animations. I am, however, a professional, so I will continue to voice over the hilariously bad footage you are looking at right now. The game was developed by Mass Media Inc., who are surprisingly still going strong after being acquired by 2K Games in 2018, and allows 1 or 2 players to activate their Ranger powers and tackle various minions and bad guys from the show, while occasionally hopping into one of the Ranger's various vehicles, or Zords. Zord, if you didn't know, is Ranger speak for giant robot, and these sections play out in first person, providing a substantial change in gameplay. The whole thing, though, is just laughably bad. The graphics are primitive, the animation is almost unbelievably terrible, and the game is so poorly designed that some stages can be completed in mere seconds by just hammering the fire button. Honestly, the kindest thing to do would be to cut the power on these Rangers. And number 1, Superman: The New Superman Adventures, 1999, 22.9%. From a whole team of lycra-clad superheroes to one who manages to both fend off the bad guys and star in shockingly awful N64 games all by himself, our number 1 entry is, of course, Superman: The New Superman Adventures, or, according to the back of the box, Superman: The New Superman Aventures. Start as you mean to go on, game. Commonly known as Superman 64, and one of those games that repeatedly shows up in worst games of all time lists, Superman: The New Superman Aventures earns its unwanted reputation by taking the Man of Steel and turning him into a sluggish, unresponsive, ugly mass of polygons who's barely able to fly through a series of stationary hoops at a serene pace. Developers Titus Interactive, who were reportedly hounded and harangued by Warner Brothers at every step, released an unfinished game that contained only a fraction of what had originally been planned. Superman explores a virtual version of Metropolis created by Lex Luthor, does battle with shadowy interlopers, and attempts to save the likes of Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen from their virtual prisons. Every aspect of the game, though, is a complete mess, with confusing, janky controls, no sense of speed or power, monotonous gameplay, and awful visuals being only the tip of the quickly sinking iceberg. Superman: The New Superman Aventures, I'll never get sick of saying it like that, is pure gaming kryptonite, and will always be remembered as one of the worst titles of all time.